Manager forces little girl to lick shoes. Then a billionaire walks in and cries. She was only 6 when the store manager forced her to her knees. Under the crystal chandelier of Manhattan's most luxurious boutique, a little girl trembled, clutching her mother's torn shoes while strangers watched in silence. The manager's voice cut through the room like a knife. "If you want those shoes so badly, lick them." The crowd froze. And in that moment, the world showed just how cruel it could be to the poor. Across the room, a man's voice thundered one that would change everything. "But tell me, what would you have done in his place?" Welcome to Emotional Echoes, a channel where emotions come alive and every story leaves a lasting echo in your heart. Please subscribe to Emotional Echoes. Help us reach 1,000 subscribers so more souls can feel these stories. Stay with my video till the very end and let me know where you're watching from so I can see how far this story spreads. Now, let me tell you the story of the shoes she never wore. A story of humiliation, truth, and love strong enough to rewrite a lifetime of pain. They ran into the store with their shoes soaked through, leaving tiny wet prints on the marble floor. Zoe held her sister's hands tightly as the chandelier light hit their faces. They had never seen so much gold and glass in one place. Zoe's eyes stopped on the white pair of shoes displayed under the light. Zara whispered that they looked just like Mom's old shoes, the ones she wore every day until the soles split open. They weren't here to steal. They just wanted to trade the broken pair for something beautiful, something their mother could wear without pain. Zara reached up, her small fingers trembling as she lifted the shoes from the shelf. She carefully placed her mother's torn ones in their place. The air behind her shifted. Karen Mitchell's sharp voice cut through the quiet like a blade. She was the store manager, tall, perfectly dressed, her red lips curving into a cold smile. She called them filthy little thieves and asked if they thought Stone Lux was a charity. The triplets froze. Zoe tried to explain that their mom was sick, that they just wanted her to have new shoes. Karen stepped closer, her heels clicking against the floor. She told them their mother could crawl there herself if she wanted something so expensive. Zara started crying. Karen grabbed her by the arm, her grip so tight the girl gasped. She lifted one of the shoes and sneered, asking if Zara wanted them enough to lick them clean. The customers around watched in silence. Some lowered their eyes, pretending not to see. The child shook her head, her small body shaking harder. Karen pushed her down to her knees. The moment hung in the air, cruel and heavy. Then a voice came from the entrance, a low, steady voice that carried power. "Put the child down." The crowd turned. Maxwell Stone stood there, the CEO of the company. His expression was unreadable. Karen tried to explain it was a misunderstanding, that she was protecting the brand. Maxwell didn't respond. He looked at the child, at her tiny hands covering her face. He told Karen she was fired, to leave before security made her. No one moved until she dropped the shoes and walked out, her heels echoing in the silence. Maxwell knelt down and helped Zara to her feet. Her tears had mixed with rainwater on her cheeks. He took a tissue from his pocket and wiped her face gently. That was when he saw them, the old, torn shoes sitting on the shelf. His eyes lingered on the frayed edges, the familiar stitching. Something in his chest tightened. He had seen that pattern before, somewhere long ago. The child whispered a thank you, clutching the shoes against her chest. Maxwell didn't answer. He just stood there, still staring at the worn leather, as if the past had quietly stepped into the room to face him again. Maxwell led the 3 girls into his office on the top floor. They were still shivering, their wet clothes clinging to their small frames, but their eyes moved around the room with quiet awe. He asked Sarah to bring them warm milk and sandwiches. The smell of cocoa filled the air, and for a moment, the chaos downstairs felt distant. Zoe whispered thank you, her voice barely above a breath. Maxwell asked where their mother was. Zoe said she was sick and couldn't walk much anymore. Then Zara looked up at him and said her mother's name, Diana Johnson. The sound froze him. It wasn't just a name. It was a memory he had buried too deep. He felt his chest tighten as the past came rushing back like a wave breaking through glass. He hadn't heard that name in 6 years, but it still carried weight, like an unfinished sentence that never stopped echoing. He asked the girls again, quietly, if they were sure. Zoe nodded and said her mum used to work in a store, a place called Stone Lux. The air in the room shifted. Maxwell leaned back slowly in his chair, staring at the old shoes still on his desk. The stitching, the pattern, it wasn't just familiar. It was personal. Diana had once shown him that same pair, years ago, proud that she could fix anything with her hands. He remembered the way she laughed when the thread snapped, and how she said imperfection made things human. That laughter had once filled these walls. Now, silence did. He closed his eyes and saw her again, young, gentle, working behind the counter with her hair tied back, and a kindness that made every customer linger. She wasn't ambitious or loud, just someone who believed work meant dignity, until the day it all collapsed. He remembered the report, the missing handbag, the meeting where Karen Mitchell convinced everyone that Diana had stolen it. He had been in Europe, managing an expansion deal. By the time he returned, the decision was made. Diana was gone. He remembered asking Karen about her later, and Karen's cold answer still haunted him. She said Diana wasn't who he thought she was, that some people could fake goodness for a long time, and he believed it. It was easier than questioning his own judgment, easier than admitting he hadn't cared enough to listen. He wished he could go back to that office and tell the man he was to stop, to see, to listen. But regret doesn't rewrite the past. It only sharpens what's left. Maxwell looked at the triplets again. Zoe's calm eyes, Zoe's restless hands, Zara's soft trembling, 6 years old. The same amount of time since Diana vanished. The realization cut through him, slow and quiet. He wondered how much she had suffered, how many nights she went to bed hungry, how many times she must have whispered prayers that never reached anyone. The girls smiled at him, innocent, unaware of the storm behind his silence. He told Sarah to drive them home safely. When the elevator doors closed, the sound echoed through the office, hollow and heavy. Maxwell turned toward the old shoes on his desk once more. They looked small and worn, but they carried something he could no longer ignore. He touched the frayed leather, whispering her name as if saying it could bring her back. Diana Johnson. It no longer sounded like a memory. It sounded like a wound still open, waiting for him to finally stop pretending it didn't bleed. Maxwell couldn't shake the thought of her. Every hour that passed felt like a mistake repeated. The next morning, he drove himself through the grey mist of Manhattan, heading toward the Bronx, clutching the address Sarah had found. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of silence that didn't mean peace but exhaustion. He parked in front of a crumbling building, climbed the narrow stairs, and knocked. No answer. A neighbor peeked through a half-open door and said softly that the woman inside hadn't come out in days. He opened the door slowly. The air was heavy with the smell of rain and cold medicine. Inside, the light barely touched the room. A thin mattress lay on the floor near the wall. Diana was there, pale, fragile, her breathing uneven. One hand rested on a pair of worn shoes, as if they were keeping her alive. For a moment, Maxwell couldn't move. All the years of silence, of thinking she had vanished into nothing, collapsed into this single image. He knelt beside her and whispered her name. Her eyelids fluttered. When she saw him, she tried to sit up, but her body gave out. Her voice cracked as she said his name, not in anger, but in disbelief. He told her not to speak, that she needed help. She shook her head weakly, embarrassed to be seen like this. He said he should have come years ago. Her lips curved faintly. Years, she murmured, couldn't fix what pride broke. He slipped his arms under her and lifted her gently, careful not to wake the ghosts between them. As he carried her toward the door, something slid from the blanket that wrapped around her. A small plastic card hit the floor with a faint sound. Maxwell looked down. It was her old employee badge from Stone Lux. The photo was faded, her smile young and unguarded, the company logo still gleaming faintly through the dust. He froze, staring at it, Then he picked it up, tucking it carefully into his pocket, as if saving a piece of the person he once failed to protect. He carried her out into the rain. Drops fell against her face, washing away the dust of years. The city's noise felt distant, softened by the sound of water. He opened the car door, placed her inside, and whispered that it was over now, that she didn't have to fight alone anymore. She didn't answer, but her fingers clung weakly to his sleeve. At the hospital, he stayed beside her through the night. The rhythmic beep of the monitor was the only sound. When she woke, her voice was faint but steady. She said she hadn't stolen anything. That day, they made her empty her bag in front of everyone. Karen called her a liar, and no one believed her. She tried to fight back, but the truth was buried under power and fear. She said she left because she was pregnant and terrified her children would grow up carrying her shame. Maxwell couldn't look at her. He told her he had believed the reports, believed Karen's words over hers. He admitted he was a coward, hiding behind convenience. He said he had trusted the wrong person and abandoned the only one who truly believed in him. His voice cracked as he confessed, but she only looked at him with tired eyes, too used to pain to blame anymore. He glanced at the chair where her shoes rested, the same torn pair from the store. He asked if she had kept them all this time. She nodded faintly, saying they were the only part of her life that never lied. He reached out and took her hand. It was cold and small, but it squeezed back with more strength than he expected. For a long moment, they said nothing. Rain tapped softly against the window, and for the first time, Maxwell felt what true regret weighed like, not noise, not anger, but a silence that demanded to be carried forever. The story spread faster than Maxwell could contain. One photo, him leaving the hospital with the triplets, exploded across every news site before dawn. Headlines twisted compassion into spectacle. Billionaire adopts 3 child thieves. Commentators laughed, analysts speculated, and talk shows tore apart every frame of the picture. Some called it charity, most called it guilt. Karen Mitchell, smelling opportunity, stepped back into the spotlight. She reached out to Tyler Reed, a journalist known for turning scandal into gold, and offered him her story. Together, they painted Diana as a manipulator, a woman rehearsed in pity. Tyler edited her interview with trembling music and dramatic pauses, shaping her into a victim of public deceit. Karen wiped fake tears and said she had only tried to protect the brand. By morning, hashtags trended worldwide. Diana's name burned again, but this time not in shame alone. It was rage, confusion, and the kind of attention that destroys the quiet people. Maxwell's office turned into a war room. Investors called, demanding answers. PR teams wanted statements. Employees whispered behind closed doors. The company's board begged him to step away for optics. Maxwell didn't respond. He sat in silence, watching a muted screen replay Karen's interview, her crocodile tears frozen mid-frame. He turned off the TV and looked toward the hospital bed. Diana was sitting up, her eyes fixed on the window, not the noise outside. She said softly, "Let them talk. They always did." He turned toward her. Her voice wasn't bitter, it was weary, like someone too used to being misunderstood. He told her the truth would surface, that people would see. She smiled faintly and said, "Truth doesn't make headlines. Only scandal does." Then she asked if he regretted stepping into this mess. He said no, not even for a second. She looked at him for a long time, then whispered that she had once believed silence was survival, but now she saw how it kills slower than lies. That night, the noise outside grew louder. Journalists camped near the hospital entrance. Some tried to photograph the girls as they walked the halls. Maxwell had security move them to a private suite, but the intrusion didn't stop. The world wanted a villain and a savior, not a family. He watched Diana cradle Zara, humming softly despite the chaos. Something inside him broke again, an ache that felt both helpless and holy. When they returned home days later, the storm followed. Reporters at the gate, headlines shifting like fire. People outside shouted her name, half in sympathy, half in mockery. Diana didn't cry. She just stood behind the curtain and whispered, "I thought I was done being a story." Maxwell put his arm around her shoulders, saying she wasn't their story anymore. She was her own. But the cost came quickly. Stone Enterprises began losing contracts. Stockholders panicked. Some accused Maxwell of moral recklessness. The foundation for his power, the one built on clean reputation, started to crack under the weight of decency. He didn't care. For the first time in years, he wasn't trying to look strong. He was just trying to do what was right. Still, the world wanted blood. News vans lined the street. Flashbulbs painted their home in artificial light. The children pressed their faces to the window, confused. Zoe asked if people were angry because they had no shoes. Diana smiled faintly and said no. They were angry because kindness doesn't sell. Maxwell said nothing. His hand brushed against hers, and for a brief moment, the noise outside faded. In that silence, he understood something simple and brutal. Truth doesn't destroy power. Fear of truth does. The morning after the storm of headlines, 2 CPS agents arrived at the house. Their smiles were thin, rehearsed, professional. They sat across from Diana at the dining table, clipboards open, pens ready. The first question was gentle enough. How was her health? The second one less so. Did she have steady income, proof of employment, insurance? Each question came like a small cut, polite but sharp. Diana tried to answer, her voice trembling but calm. She said she was getting stronger, that she would start working soon. The woman nodded, barely listening, already writing. Maxwell sat beside her, his hands clasped tightly. He had been in courtrooms and board meetings all his life, but nothing had ever felt as cruel as this quiet interrogation. He interrupted once, saying that Diana had never neglected her children, that they were healthy and safe. The agent looked up briefly, smiled that official smile, and said they were just doing their job. He asked if their job included humiliating a mother in her own home. The room went silent for a moment before the woman cleared her throat and changed the topic. After they left, Diana sat still, staring at the empty cups on the table. Her hands were shaking. Maxwell told her it was over for now, but he didn't sound sure. She whispered that it never really ends, that for people like her, judgment always finds a new form. He wanted to argue but couldn't. He had seen it too many times, the world pretending to help while secretly enjoying the fall of someone it once ignored. That afternoon, the headlines came again, uglier than before. Tyler Reed's story dropped online with new evidence. It was old photos from Stone Lux, the day security escorted Diana out. The images were grainy but clear enough, her face pale, her hands trembling as the guards led her through the crowd. The caption read, "The woman who fooled a billionaire." Comments poured in by the thousands. Some laughed. Some said she was acting again. Others asked if Maxwell was next. By evening, every channel replayed the story. Even the TV in Diana's hospital room flickered with the same images. She had returned for a checkup, exhausted from the stress. The screen showed her younger self being pushed toward the door while Karen stood behind, watching coldly. Then came the same security footage replayed the moment that stole her name. Her face, frozen in shock, her mouth open as she tried to explain, the guards holding her arms. The humiliation looped again and again. Each replay, another wound reopened. Diana turned away, pressing her hands against her face. Her voice was a whisper. She said she would never escape it, that no matter how much truth she spoke, people had already chosen their version. Maxwell walked in, saw the screen, and switched it off. She didn't look at him. She just said quietly that she was tired of being a lesson people used to feel better about themselves. He knelt beside her, saying the world could take her name, but it couldn't take her worth. She laughed weakly, saying worth doesn't trend. He took her hand. She didn't pull away. Outside the window, the city lights blinked like a restless heartbeat. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence said enough. The world had turned its back again, but this time, Maxwell wasn't going anywhere. He knew now what it meant to stand beside someone when everyone else had already decided who they were. The courtroom was full before the hearing even began. Reporters filled every seat. Their cameras pointed at the table where Diana sat beside her lawyer. She kept her hands folded, her eyes on the floor. Maxwell sat behind her, silent, his jaw tense. Across the room, Karen Mitchell looked calm and polished, like she was attending a business meeting. Tyler Reed sat beside her, ready to record every word. When the judge entered, the room fell quiet. Karen was the first to testify. She spoke clearly, her voice steady, rehearsed. She said Diana had always been difficult, manipulative, and obsessed with Maxwell's attention. She said the theft was part of a pattern, that Diana used sympathy to get what she wanted. She even claimed that Maxwell's recent involvement with her was another attempt to exploit his guilt. The audience murmured, believing her confidence. Maxwell's hands tightened around the chair in front of him, but he stayed silent. Diana was called next. She stood slowly, her knees weak. When asked to respond, her voice broke. She said none of it was true, that she never stole anything, never lied, never used anyone. But every word came out like a whisper. The lawyer pressed her, asking why she didn't fight harder back then. She said she tried, but no one listened. Her voice faded until the judge had to ask her to repeat herself. By the time she finished, she was trembling. Maxwell looked at Sarah, his assistant, who sat a few rows back holding a flash drive. He nodded once. Sarah stood and asked permission to submit new evidence. The judge allowed it. The screen at the front of the room flickered on. The footage was old, grainy, but clear enough. It showed the back office of Stone Lux. Karen was standing near the lockers, looking around before slipping a designer handbag into one of them. The timestamp matched the day of the accusation. A gasp spread through the courtroom. Karen's face drained of color. She stammered that it wasn't what it looked like, that she had only moved the bag temporarily. But Sarah played the second clip. It showed security guards later searching the same locker, pulling out the handbag, and Karen standing behind them with a small, satisfied smile. The judge leaned forward, his expression unreadable. Karen's voice cracked. She said she hadn't meant for it to go this far, that she just wanted Diana gone because she thought Diana was dangerous for the company. Maxwell rose from his seat. His voice was calm, but every word hit like ice. He told her she didn't destroy a company, she destroyed a life. And not just Diana's, but his own. Karen started crying, saying she was sorry, but no one looked at her. Diana covered her face, her body shaking. For the first time in years, people looked at her differently. Not as a thief, but as a woman who had been silenced. Maxwell stepped closer, his eyes fixed on the judge. He said quietly that all he wanted was for the truth to be written down this time, not erased. The judge cleared his throat and spoke firmly. The court found Diana Johnson innocent of all past accusations. Karen Mitchell would be charged with defamation, falsifying evidence, and obstruction of justice. The gavel struck once, echoing through the room. Diana broke down, her tears no longer from shame but release. Maxwell reached out and took her hand. The cameras flashed again, but this time the light didn't feel cruel. It felt like the world, at last, had turned toward the truth. The noise in the courtroom slowly faded after the verdict. Diana sat still, her hands trembling in her lap. She looked lost, as if her body was here but her mind hadn't caught up to what had just happened. Maxwell remained standing, his chest rising and falling with slow, heavy breaths. Then he reached into his jacket and took out an envelope. He told the judge there was one more truth that needed to be heard. The courtroom quieted again. Reporters leaned forward, sensing another revelation. Maxwell handed the document to the clerk and said it was a DNA test. The judge opened it, scanned the first lines, and nodded. Maxwell turned toward Diana. He said the test confirmed what his heart had already known. He was the biological father of Zoe, and Zara. A wave of murmurs spread through the room. The triplets, sitting with Sarah a few seats away, looked at each other and then at him. Zara was the first to move. She ran to him, calling out "Daddy," her voice breaking in midair. The other two followed, their small hands clinging to his legs. Maxwell bent down, his arms circling all three, as if he was trying to make up for 6 years of absence in one breath. Diana covered her mouth, sobbing quietly. The courtroom blurred before her eyes. Relief and heartbreak twisted together inside her. She whispered that they finally had a father, and yet part of her ached at the years lost. Maxwell looked at her and said they still had time to build what was stolen. The judge smiled faintly and announced that with the DNA confirmation and cleared charges, the CPS case would be withdrawn immediately. Applause broke out from the back rows, reporters lowering their cameras for once. Outside, the tone of the media shifted overnight. The same outlets that had called her a liar now called her a survivor. The headlines spoke of redemption, truth, and a love that defied judgment. For the first time in years, Diana's name appeared next to words like strength and mother, not scandal. Maxwell ignored every microphone waiting outside the courthouse. He only turned back to Diana. She tried to speak, but he stepped closer and knelt before her. He said he wasn't asking for forgiveness for what he did, but for what he failed to do. He hadn't protected her when it mattered most. He hadn't believed in the woman who believed in him without question. His voice cracked as he said she had carried all the pain alone that he should have shared. Diana shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. She told him the past couldn't be changed, but love could rewrite what came next. He took her hand gently, pressing it to his forehead. The girls stood between them, looking up with innocent smiles. The judge called for order, but no one moved. The cameras clicked again, catching the family wrapped together in that small circle of light. Maxwell lifted his eyes and whispered that this was what love proved, not perfection, but the courage to stay when everything else had fallen apart. And for the first time, Diana smiled without fear. Several months passed after the trial, and the city seemed to breathe again. The chaos that once filled every headline faded into quiet stories of renewal. Maxwell kept his word. He built something lasting out of the wreckage, the Stone Foundation for Families, a non-profit that offered legal aid and financial support to single parents and workers who had been silenced by unfairness. He said it was born from guilt, but Diana told him it was born from grace. On the day of the grand opening, the foundation's lobby was filled with people whose lives had already been changed by its work. There were mothers with children clinging to their sides, fathers who had regained custody, young women who had found the courage to start again. Maxwell stood at the front, watching Diana speak to the crowd. Her voice was calm and steady. She spoke about dignity, about second chances, about how healing never comes all at once, but piece by piece. Her words carried more weight than any speech he could have written. When she finished, applause filled the room. The triplets ran to her, each wearing little badges with the foundation's logo. They tugged at her hands, asking if she was proud. She smiled, saying she was proud of all of them, every person in that room who refused to give up. Maxwell watched her, realizing that the woman who once hid behind shame now stood taller than anyone in the crowd. Sarah came to stand beside him, her expression soft. She said quietly that the storm had given birth to sunshine. Maxwell smiled faintly and answered that love had been the umbrella. Sarah laughed through tears, saying it was the first time she had ever heard him sound like a poet. He said maybe some storms were worth it if they washed away what didn't matter. Later that afternoon, as guests mingled and shared their stories, Diana found him near the entrance. She said she still couldn't believe all of this had grown from so much pain. Maxwell told her that pain had always been fertile ground for kindness. She reached for his hand, and for a moment they simply stood there, surrounded by the soft hum of life moving forward. Zoe and Zoe were helping hand out welcome cards, while Zara climbed into Maxwell's arms, whispering that she wanted to help too. He told her she already had. Her laughter echoed down the hallway. Nearby, a reporter quietly took a picture of the family standing under the foundation's banner. For once, the photo captured not scandal but peace. As the event drew to a close, Diana looked at the people leaving with hope in their eyes. She told Maxwell that she used to think life had broken her. Now she realized it had only bent her toward compassion. He told her that forgiveness had saved them both, and she smiled, saying that maybe love was always waiting at the end of the longest fight. The rain returned that afternoon, soft and steady, like the city was remembering. Maxwell parked in front of Stone Lux, the store where everything had begun and broken. The chandelier inside still hung from the ceiling, glowing faintly through the glass. But the sign on the door was new. It no longer said Stone Lux Avenue. It said The Heart Collection, a community branch of the foundation where fashion met purpose. Every sale went to help families in need. The place that once humiliated a child had become a house of kindness. They walked inside together. Diana paused for a moment, taking in the polished floor and the soft music that replaced silence. It felt almost unreal. The last time she was here, she had been dragged out in front of strangers. Now, she walked freely, holding the hand of the man who once failed her, but now stood beside her. The triplets ran ahead, their laughter echoing through the aisles. Zara stopped at the display near the front. On it sat a single pair of white shoes, much like the ones that had started it all. She looked up at her mother, and then down at the shoes she held in her hands, the same torn pair Diana had clutched through sickness and shame. She placed them gently on the shelf, whispering that her mum didn't need new shoes anymore because she walked on love now. The words hung in the air like a quiet prayer. Diana covered her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. Maxwell stepped closer, his hand finding hers. He told her she would never walk alone again. She looked up at him, the light from the chandelier glimmering in her eyes. For a moment, they stood there without words, surrounded by memories of pain that had somehow softened into grace. Sarah approached from across the room, carrying a bouquet of white lilies. She smiled and said they belonged there, a symbol of what had bloomed after the storm. Maxwell thanked her, his voice low but warm. Diana reached out, placing one hand on the shoes, one on her daughter's shoulder, as if sealing the past where it belonged. Outside, the rain kept falling, but it no longer felt heavy. People passed by the window, stopping to look at the family inside, not out of judgment, but admiration. Inside that store, time felt slower, quieter, almost sacred. The chandelier above shone brighter now, reflecting not luxury but redemption. The narrator's voice would have whispered that, under that same chandelier, where shame once echoed, love now stood tall. That sometimes the smallest act of compassion could rewrite a lifetime of pain. And if someone were watching closely, they might have seen Diana smile, not as a woman who had survived, but as someone who had finally come home. Sometimes a story begins in shame and ends in grace. What once looked like a crime turned out to be love trying to survive, in a world that forgot how to see it. Diana's journey began with humiliation under bright lights and ended under the same chandelier, but this time with forgiveness shining brighter than gold. Maxwell learned that power means nothing without compassion, and the girls proved that even small hands can carry the biggest truths. The storm that almost destroyed them became the bridge that led them home. Maybe that is what life really teaches us, that kindness is stronger than judgment, and that sometimes the ones who fall hardest are the ones who rise with gentler hearts. They called it theft, but it was love. They called her a liar, but she was just unseen. If this story touched your heart, share it, because kindness doesn't cost a thing. And if you believe the world still has room for stories like this, stay with us. Thanks for watching Emotional Echoes.